Welcome to English Buzz!
Your daily news update starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily English Buzz.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah, and if you are tuning in to practice your English, and you are hovering around that B2 level, which means, you grasp the mechanics of the language, but you are really looking to master how native speakers talk about these complex global issues in real time. Well, you have pulled up a chair at the exact right table.
You really have.
We are treating you like the third person in this room today. So get ready to jump into the comments because we have a massive stack of sources to get through, and the implications are heavy.
They're so heavy. And as we were combing through today's reports, the articles and the research papers, this very clear, almost unsettling hidden thread started to emerge, connecting all of them.
Yeah, it was super obvious once we laid it all out.
Exactly. Whether we are talking about geopolitics or experimental space tech or biology, today's deep dive is fundamentally about one massive theme, and that is systems of power and control.
Systems of power and control. Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to take you on a journey today. We are starting with the incredibly messy, chaotic systems that humans build to maintain power. So we are talking about the global auto industry and the energy sector.
Right.
We have reports detailing how the current geopolitical tensions in Iran are actively draining the wallets of everyday people in Europe.
It is a massive financial drain.
And we're going to look at how major political maneuvers, specifically, decisions coming from Donald Trump in the U.S., contrasted with the massive influence of China, are completely fracturing the foundation of global manufacturing.
It really is a masterclass in how fragile human systems actually are. It's exhausting just watching human institutions trying to manage ground-level energy.
It's so messy.
It's so tied up in endless bureaucracy and volatile borders. You can almost understand why some tech billionaires are just, giving up on Earth entirely.
Just throwing their hands up and looking to the stars.
Exactly, looking to the stars to bypass geopolitics altogether,
No.
which is exactly where we will go next in the deep dive. We are going to examine how humanity is trying to literally engineer control over nature itself.
Which brings us back to that startup wanting to launch giant mirrors into orbit to sell sunlight at night. I still have so many questions about the physics of that.
Oh, we will get into the physics.
Good, because not to mention the massive Big Brother surveillance vibes it gives off. But we won't stay in space for the whole deep dive.
Right. To wrap up, we are going to look at a biological system that completely redefines the concept of intelligence.
The brainless yellow slime mold.
The very one. It designs transit networks, it shares physical memories, and it does it all without a single neuron.
It is a beautiful contrast between the chaos of human brains and the elegant optimization of brainless nature.
So let's ground ourselves first in the human chaos.
Let's do it. Dive right in.
The first piece of source material we have is a really comprehensive report dissecting the current state of the global auto and energy industries. And the headline figure jumping off the page is almost difficult to comprehend.
It's a huge number.
It really is. Primarily due to the ongoing war and the cascading geopolitical tensions involving Iran, European drivers are footing a staggering bill. We are looking at 150 million euros.
Every single day.
Every single day, just in the increased costs of gasoline and diesel.
Okay, let's pause and actually look at the mechanics of that number because, when we hear 150 million, our brains tend to just categorize it as a lot and move on.
Yeah, it becomes abstract.
Exactly. But where's that money actually going?
Yeah.
And how does it manifest for you, the listener, in your daily life?
Well, it manifests in the absolute baseline cost of existing in modern society. That 150 million euros isn't just a tax paid by people who commute to work in personal cars.
Right.
It is vanishing from the broader European economy daily.
Yeah.
Think about the logistics of daily life. If you walk into a grocery store in Berlin or Paris today, the apples, the bread, the milk, none of it was grown behind the store.
No, obviously not.
It arrived on a heavy-duty truck, and that truck runs on diesel.
So when fuel lines are disrupted by conflicts in the Middle East, specifically around Iran, what actually happens?
The maritime shipping insurance goes way up, the physical scarcity of the refined product increases, and the price at the pump skyrockets.
And according to the breakdown in this report, diesel is taking the absolute worst hit. The price of diesel has risen 25% more than the price of gasoline.
Which is a massive jump.
It is. And honestly, it feels counterintuitive to me. If diesel is primarily used for commercial transport and essential logistics, like bringing food to the grocery store, wouldn't governments prioritize subsidizing or stabilizing it over consumer gasoline?
I mean, in theory, yes. You would think they'd want to prevent runaway inflation on consumer goods. But the physical reality of refining crude oil doesn't really care about economic theory.
Right. Chemistry doesn't care about politics.
Exactly. Refineries produce a certain ratio of gasoline to diesel from every barrel of crude. You can't just easily flip a switch and say, okay, today we are making exclusively diesel.
Okay, that makes sense.
Plus, the European market had heavily leaned into diesel passenger cars for decades. This was before all the emission scandals shifted public opinion.
So you have this massive existing fleet of diesel passenger vehicles combined with essential freight trucks, all competing for a fuel supply that is suddenly throttled by a geopolitical choke point.
Spot on.
And this is happening at a time when diesel was already really struggling. The original Spanish report we are pulling from used this fantastic phrase to describe the diesel market prior to this crisis.
Oh, I loved this part.
They described it as being de capa caída, which, for our B2 learners out there, is such great imagery. It's basically picturing a superhero whose cape has fallen off and is just dragging in the mud.
Yeah, it means to be in decline or losing your status.
Right. Diesel was already losing its power, going into a steep structural decline long before this because of environmental regulations and the push toward electric vehicles. But this 25% price spike.
Yeah, what did the report call it?
The report calls it the puntilla, which translates to the final fatal blow.
Which turns this from, an abstract environmental issue into an immediate localized wallet issue for everyday drivers and business owners.
Seriously.
If you are operating a fleet of delivery vans, a 25% spike in your primary operational cost is the difference between staying in business and declaring bankruptcy. It accelerates the death of the diesel engine, not through policy, but through sheer financial pain.
Wait, I'm a bit confused, though. If we look at this logically, if traditional fossil fuels are becoming this volatile, this wildly expensive, and this vulnerable to conflicts halfway across the world...
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Shouldn't the electric vehicle manufacturers be popping champagne right now?
You would think so.
Like, this should be their golden moment. A 150 million euro daily tax on gas is the ultimate advertisement for switching to electric. So why is the industry publication describing the EV market as being in a state of absolute panic instead of cashing in?
That is the exact paradox our next source digs into, and it perfectly illustrates how fragile these systems are when politics gets involved.
Okay, lay it on me.
To understand the panic, we have to look across the Atlantic to the United States. Now, as a quick note for you listening, and we have to be super clear here.
Yes, very important disclaimer.
Looking at the U.S. means looking at deeply polarized politics. We are just looking at the industry data here, totally stripping away the red and blue political ideologies.
100%. We are neutrally analyzing the cause and effect of these policies on global manufacturing, exactly as the auto industry publications report them. We are not taking sides.
Right. We are treating political decisions purely as data inputs into an economic model.
So what is the specific data input coming from the U.S. right now?
The major headline is that Donald Trump is actively eliminating the 2009 Dictamen de Peligro,
which in English is known as the danger finding or the endangerment finding from the Obama administration era.
Correct. And this wasn't just some minor rule. This specific finding was the foundational legal bedrock for essentially all federal measures aimed at preventing global warming in the U.S. It was the scientific and legal justification that allowed the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate tailpipe emissions from cars in the first place.
And the source notes that to combat the rising gas prices we just talked about, Trump is reportedly looking at what the publication terms ideas felices,
which is another great term to break down.
Yeah, for our B2 learners, that translates literally to happy ideas. But in the context of policy and economics, it basically means quick fixes.
Yeah, superficial solutions.
Exactly. It's putting a tiny, colorful Band-Aid on a fractured bone. It's a solution that sounds great in a press conference, but lacks any real structural depth.
Exactly. And while rolling back regulations and offering quick fixes might sound to a consumer like the government is just, getting out of the way to lower prices, the auto industry publication claims this actually puts the entire American car manufacturing sector at massive risk.
They feature a very stark quote in the report. They say, "No one will want to buy an American car."
Which is a huge statement.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. Because on the surface, why would less regulation make an American car unsellable? If Ford or Chevy can suddenly build whatever engine they want without the government breathing down their neck, shouldn't they be able to produce cheaper cars?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to the lead time required for heavy manufacturing.
What do you mean by lead time?
Well, car manufacturing is not like agile software development. You don't
Oh.
just push an update to an app and change the product overnight. When a legacy automaker decides to design a new vehicle, they are looking at a timeline that stretches a decade into the future.
Right, they can't just pivot in a week.
Exactly. They have to secure mining contracts for raw materials, design entirely new chassis architectures, retool massive physical factories, and train hundreds of thousands of workers.
So let's imagine you were sitting in the boardroom at Ford, let's say, back in 2018.
Okay, I'm the CEO of Ford in 2018.
The government regulations, based on that 2009 danger finding, are telling you that by the late 2020s, your fleet's average emissions must be drastically lower.
Right. So in 2018, I look at the law and I commit tens of billions of dollars to battery research, electric motor design, and building new EV factories. I basically structure my entire corporate future around the assumption that the transition away from fossil fuels is a legal certainty.
And then suddenly, we jump to today, the political winds shift. The foundational regulation is eliminated. The government says, never mind, there are no strict emissions targets anymore. Build whatever you want.
And suddenly, my billions of dollars in EV research are totally misaligned with the immediate domestic legal landscape.
Precisely. And the critical issue is that the U.S. market does not exist in a vacuum. While the U.S. is experiencing this severe regulatory whiplash, the rest of the world, specifically Europe and parts of Asia, are still rigidly enforcing their transitions to electric vehicles.
Ah, see the problem.
Right. So if you are an American automaker and you take advantage of the relaxed U.S. laws to build a highly profitable, massive gas-guzzling SUV,
You're building a product that is literally illegal to sell in Europe.
yes, you end up with a fractured global market. Unpredictability is the ultimate enemy of heavy industry.
They hate unpredictability more than anything.
They don't necessarily care what the rules are, as long as the rules are stable and universally applied so they can actually optimize their supply chains.
That makes total sense. When the U.S. government removes the pressure to innovate toward clean energy, it disincentivizes American companies from keeping pace with global technological advancements.
That is exactly why the source claims no one will want to buy an American car. If the domestic industry falls a decade behind in battery efficiency and software integration because the regulatory pressure was removed, their products just become obsolete on the global stage.
It is a perfect storm of chaos. You have Europe bleeding cash over localized geopolitical fuel bottlenecks, and you have the U.S. auto industry paralyzed by domestic political pendulum swings.
Fragmented, reactive, and incredibly fragile.
But then the reports pivot. They point us to the other side of the globe, to China. And the contrast in how they manage their systems of production is really jarring. It is a completely different operating system.
The level of centralization is unprecedented in modern auto manufacturing. To illustrate this, the source highlights a very severe warning issued by the CEO of the Volvo Group.
And he was directing his comments primarily at European legacy automakers. Right?
Yeah. He summarized the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers using 4 specific descriptors. He said they are fast, innovative, resolute, and committed.
I want to focus on that word resolute for a second.
It's such a powerful vocabulary word.
It really is. For you listening, if you are resolute, it means you are purposefully determined, you have a clear vision, and you are unwavering in your execution of it. You do not second guess, and you definitely do not backtrack.
And we're seeing this exact resolute nature play out in how companies like BYD are operating right now.
BYD is currently a massive titan in the Chinese EV market.
Huge. And the report notes they aren't just satisfied with exporting their own BYD-branded cars. They are actively hunting to acquire a traditional legacy Western brand.
Which is a strategically brilliant, albeit super aggressive, maneuver. Think about the psychology of a car buyer in Germany or the US.
Okay.
Building brand loyalty takes generations. Trusting a new foreign brand with a $50,000 purchase is a massive psychological hurdle for a consumer.
Right, because if I buy a car from a brand I've never heard of, I'm worrying about parts, I'm worrying about where the service centers are, I'm worrying if the company will even exist in 5 years to honor the warranty.
Exactly. But if a Chinese manufacturer possesses vastly superior, cheaper battery technology, which many industry analysts argue they currently do, they don't need to spend 30 years convincing European consumers to trust them.
They just buy the trust.
Yes. They can simply deploy their capital, purchase a recognized 100-year-old European badge, inject their advanced tech under the hood, and instantly inherit a century of consumer trust and an existing distribution network.
It's literally a shortcut to global dominance. Yeah. But the source includes a massive caveat here, a critical reminder about how the Chinese system actually operates behind the scenes.
Right, the strict impartiality here again. We are just reporting how the system works.
We cannot forget that China exercises absolute strict control over its car makers. It's a form of state-backed capitalism that Western markets fundamentally struggle to compete against.
The article cites a specific historical example, noting that the Chinese government previously asked its car manufacturers to actively withdraw their investments from Europe.
And that detail right there is the crux of the control theme of this deep dive. Think about the sheer mechanical power required to execute that.
It's mind-boggling.
In the United States or Europe, a government can tweak a tax incentive, or they can raise a tariff, hoping the free market responds the way they want. But they cannot simply summon the CEOs of private corporations into a room and order them to abandon a multi-billion-dollar foreign market strategy.
No, the lawsuits would be immediate.
Exactly. But in China, the state apparatus and the industrial sector are inextricably linked. If Beijing determines that a geopolitical shift requires an economic retraction, the companies comply. The system moves as a single, unified organism.
Again, viewing this purely through the lens of systems analysis, a highly centralized structure lacks internal friction. Years ago, the Chinese state identified the electric vehicle supply chain from the raw mineral mining in Africa to the battery cell production as a critical sector for global dominance.
They saw the future.
And they aligned their subsidies, their foreign policy, and their domestic manufacturing targets to achieve that single goal. They were resolute. Meanwhile, the Western systems are incredibly porous, constantly reacting to four-year election cycles, lobbying groups, and the immediate vulnerability of global fuel lines.
It paints a picture of humanity scrambling in the dirt. We are fighting over finite liquids pumped from the ground, shifting laws back and forth, and trying to outmaneuver each other with tariffs and corporate buyouts.
It is heavy, it is dirty, and it is endlessly complicated.
And quite frankly, reading through these economic reports makes you realize why someone would look at this entire earthly mess and think, what if we just bypass the ground entirely?
Right. What if we leapfrog the geopolitics, the fuel shipping lanes, and the regulations, and we just tap directly into the ultimate source of power?
Which brings us perfectly to our second major topic. We are leaving the fractured reality of terrestrial energy grids and stepping into the highly ambitious, slightly terrifying world of orbital infrastructure.
Yes. We are talking about a company called Reflect Orbital.
I have been waiting to dig into this because this completely short-circuited my brain when I read it.
It's wild.
There is a U.S.-based startup, Reflect Orbital, helmed by a CEO named Ben Nowak. Their entire business model is predicated on solving the single most glaring flaw in renewable solar energy.
Which is the obvious flaw. Solar panels are completely useless when the sun goes down.
The night is the enemy of solar power. Energy demand often peaks in the early evening when people get home from work, turn on their appliances, and plug in those electric cars we were just talking about. But that is exactly when solar generation drops to zero.
So Reflect Orbital's pitch is simple but insane. They want to generate clean solar energy in the dead of night.
The premise sounds like a violation of the laws of physics. If the Earth has rotated and your specific geographic location is facing the dark void of space, how do you harvest sunlight?
By putting mirrors in orbit.
Giant space mirrors.
Yes. Their master plan is to deploy a constellation of 60 satellites, positioning them in a sun-synchronous orbit about 600 kilometers above the surface of the Earth.
That's pretty high up.
It is.
Yeah.
And these aren't just your standard communication satellites. They are equipped with massive, highly reflective mylar mirrors.
Okay, so how does the actual mechanism work?
It works like this. When a massive solar farm down on Earth is plunged into darkness, and the local grid is desperate for power, these satellites, which are high enough to still be bathed in direct sunlight over the horizon, will physically angle their mirrors.
They just tilt toward the dark spot.
Exactly. They catch the sun's rays and reflect a concentrated, focused beam of pure sunlight back down through the atmosphere, directly targeting the dark solar farm.
They are essentially trying to manufacture sunlight on demand.
It is an audacious attempt to decouple human energy consumption from the natural rotation of the planet.
When I was trying to visualize the physics of this, my mind immediately went back to being a kid in the backyard with a magnifying glass.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. You remember holding the glass at just the right angle to catch the sun and focus it into that blindingly bright, incredibly hot little dot on a dry leaf.
And setting the leaf on fire.
Exactly. It's that exact principle, but scaled up to a cosmic level. Or, to put it in terms of sports for our B2 listeners, think of a relay race.
Okay, walk us through the relay race.
In track and field, one runner sprints their segment of the track and then physically hands a baton to the next runner to continue the momentum. Reflect Orbital is basically setting up an orbital relay race. The sun passes the baton of light to the satellite, and the satellite hurls that baton down to the Earth, completely bypassing the shadow of the night.
It's a highly effective way to think about it, and while it sounds entirely theoretical, like something drawn up on a whiteboard after way too much coffee, our sources emphasize that this isn't just a conceptual fantasy.
Wait, they've actually done this?
They have already executed a physical proof of concept. Now, they haven't launched into space yet. The timeline for the orbital launch is slated for late 2025, but they successfully tested the tracking and reflection mechanics right here in the atmosphere using a hot air balloon.
I want to know exactly how that test worked, because aiming a mirror from the sky sounds incredibly difficult. Like, how do you hold it steady?
It is incredibly difficult. For the test, they equipped a high-altitude balloon with a scaled-down version of their mirror technology and specialized tracking software. They sent the balloon 3 kilometers up into the sky.
Okay, 3 kilometers.
From that altitude, the system had to lock onto a moving target on the ground, stabilize the mirror against the atmospheric winds, and hold the reflection steady.
And did it work?
It worked. They successfully diverted 500 watts of solar energy to a specific target point on the ground.
Now, 500 watts doesn't sound like a massive amount of power. I mean, if you look at standard household appliances, 500 watts is maybe enough to run a heavy-duty blender or power a gaming PC or light up a few very bright LED floodlights. It isn't going to power a city.
No. The raw power output of the balloon test wasn't the point at all.
It was just a proof of concept.
Right. The purpose was to prove the geometry, the stabilization algorithms, and the target tracking software. Hitting a specific coordinate with a beam of light from 3 kilometers up while suspended from a moving balloon proves that the math works.
And the math has to be flawless if you are going to scale it up to an object moving at orbital velocity 600 kilometers away.
Absolutely flawless.
And what makes this startup so fascinating to me is the historical context. When you read the deep dives into aerospace engineering, you realize we are not the first generation to attempt to hack the sun.
No, this has been tried before.
Right. The report specifically references a Russian space project from the 1990s known as Znamya.
Yeah, the engineers in the Russian space program had a very similar, albeit more localized, goal. They literally tried to extend the length of daylight.
Which sounds so poetic, but also crazy.
They deployed a 20-meter reflective film structure from the Mir space station. Their objective was to reflect a beam of sunlight to illuminate a 4-kilometer radius on the ground.
Why? What was the practical application they were hoping for with that?
Well, they wanted to provide extra hours of working light for remote northern cities in Russia and Siberia during the brutal, long, dark winters.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
The theory was that extending the daylight would increase agricultural productivity and reduce the massive energy costs required to artificially light these industrial towns.
But the Znamya project ultimately failed, right? I mean, we don't have Russian space mirrors lighting up Siberia today.
It failed, and it failed for a confluence of reasons that actually highlight why Reflect Orbital thinks they can succeed now. First, the deployment mechanism for the second Znamya test malfunctioned. The mirror literally snagged on an antenna.
Oh, that's frustrating.
But the broader failure was economic and technological. The light they managed to reflect during their first successful test was described as being about as bright as a full moon.
Which isn't very bright at all.
No, it wasn't nearly intense enough to justify the astronomical cost of the project. In the 1990s, launching mass into orbit was prohibitively expensive. Every kilogram cost tens of thousands of dollars. The materials they used for the reflectors weren't efficient enough, and the software to actively aim the beam was primitive. It simply wasn't financially viable to maintain.
So the obvious question is, why does Ben Nowak and his team at Reflect Orbital think it will work today? What has fundamentally changed in the last 30 years?
The entire aerospace paradigm has shifted. The primary barrier, the cost of launching mass into space, has plummeted thanks to companies like SpaceX and the advent of reusable rockets.
Getting a satellite into a 600-kilometer orbit is just a fraction of the cost it was in the 90s.
Exactly. Furthermore, the material science behind the Mylar reflectors is vastly superior now, making them incredibly lightweight but highly reflective. And most importantly, our software capabilities. The gyroscopic stabilization, the GPS targeting, the automated algorithms required to keep a mirror perfectly angled while traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour are light years ahead of what the Russians had on the Mir space station.
So technologically, the pieces are on the board. The virtual simulations and the balloon tests are showing incredible promise. But, and there was always a massive but, when humans attempt to geoengineer the planet on a whim.
Always a but.
The source explicitly details the backlash and the challenges. We are talking about deploying 60 massive satellites into low Earth orbit.
The most immediate logistical concern is the contribution to space junk. Low Earth orbit is already becoming dangerously crowded.
But the far more contentious issue raised in the article revolves around light pollution and what they vaguely term other complications during operation.
Other complications. Very vague.
Very. The company is currently on a PR offensive, insisting that they have everything under control and that the targeted beams of light will not negatively affect the general population.
I mean, they have to say that.
I have to be completely honest here, and this is where the millennial and Gen Z internet has completely hijacked the narrative around this startup. Here's where it gets really interesting. The company can release all the reassuring press statements they want, saying, we have it under control, but let's be realistic about human nature and corporate power. If you announce that you are building giant space mirrors to shoot highly concentrated beams of solar radiation at the Earth in the dead of night, you are immediately going to trigger massive Big Brother conspiracy fears.
It is an unavoidable psychological reaction because you are fundamentally asking the question, who owns the night sky?
Exactly. We have spent thousands of years looking up at the stars, writing poetry about the dark, sleeping in the dark. Imagine you were just walking your dog at midnight in your quiet suburban neighborhood. Suddenly, the sky above you erupts.
It would be terrifying.
It lights up with the intensity of a football stadium because a private tech corporation decided it was peak pricing hours, and they wanted to sell a burst of sunlight on demand to the local power grid operator down the street. Do we, as citizens, get a vote on whether our sky stays dark?
It forces us to confront profound ethical and regulatory questions about the privatization of nature. We started this deep dive detailing how human systems are currently fracturing because we are fighting over oil and energy buried in the ground.
Right.
If Reflect Orbital succeeds and proves this is a highly profitable model, what stops 10 other companies from launching their own mirrors? Are we just trading terrestrial geopolitical oil wars for corporate spacelight monopolies?
That's a scary thought.
If a single CEO commands a fleet of satellites that can turn night into day anywhere on the planet, they hold an immense, almost godlike amount of leverage.
And what about the margin for error? Let's talk about the other complications. What if the targeting software experiences a glitch? What if a micrometeorite hits a satellite and knocks the mirror off its axis by just a fraction of a degree?
At a distance of 600 kilometers, a microscopic misalignment could mean that instead of beaming that intense 500-watt per square meter light onto an empty solar farm, you accidentally beam it directly into a densely populated residential neighborhood.
Or across a major highway, blinding drivers at 2 a.m.
The potential for unintended consequences is staggering. It is the absolute pinnacle of top-down control. We have created a messy, inefficient energy grid, and instead of simplifying it, our instinct is to engineer our way out of the crisis by building the most complex, high-risk infrastructure imaginable in the vacuum of space.
It feels like an incredibly human solution to a human problem. Just throw billions of dollars in rockets at it until it works.
It's typical.
So I have to stop and ask you, the listener, because this is going to be a reality within your lifetime. We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you be okay with a private corporation turning night into day over your city so that you could have slightly cheaper electricity? Is the permanent loss of the natural dark night sky a fair trade for clean 2047 solar energy? Do you trust a company to hold that kind of power? Tell us what you think.
It really highlights a predictable pattern in our behavior. When humanity faces complex systemic problems like energy distribution or transit logistics, our default setting is to build massive, expensive, top-down infrastructure.
We love a big project.
We assume that because the problem is big, the solution must involve trillions of dollars, supercomputers, and decades of centralized planning. But what if true intelligence and perfect network optimization don't actually require billions of dollars? What if they don't even require a brain?
Oh, I am so ready for this pivot. We are leaving the cold, sterile, high-tech vacuum of orbit, and we are crashing back down to Earth, literally into the dirt.
Down into the mud.
We're heading into the damp, decaying floor of the forest. Listeners, we are about to introduce you to the absolute weirdest, most paradigm-shifting topic of the day. I want to introduce you to a biological anomaly called Physarum polycephalum.
In the Spanish scientific literature we reviewed, it is commonly referred to as a limo brillante, or a mojo. In English, the colloquial term is a slime mold.
Slime mold.
But as the biological sources are very quick to clarify, the name is entirely misleading. It isn't actually a mold, and it isn't a fungus.
No, it's not a plant, it's not an animal, and it's not a fungus. It is categorized as a giant amoeba. Let me try to explain the biology here, because it defies logic.
Go for it.
Most organisms start as a single microscopic cell, and as they grow, that cell divides. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, and eventually you have a creature made of billions of individual cells working together. But Physarum polycephalum doesn't do that.
Right, breaks the rules.
It starts out as a single microscopic cell, but as it consumes nutrients, it just gets bigger and bigger. It never divides its cell membrane. It just replicates the nuclei inside.
So what you end up with is a single continuous cell membrane containing millions of individual nuclei, all suspended in a shared pool of cytoplasm.
Exactly. It grows into this massive, bright yellow, pulsating web-like supercell. It can grow to be up to 1 meter long.
1 meter.
A single biological cell that you can look at with the naked eye, spread out across a rotting log. And I was reading the research notes I wrote down in the margins. This is an alien living on Earth.
It certainly exhibits behaviors that feel alien to our understanding of biology. And the reason this bright yellow slime mold is the anchor for our discussion on systems of power and control is because of a profoundly disruptive experiment conducted by a team of researchers in Japan.
Oh, this experiment is mind-blowing.
This experiment challenged everything we thought we knew about intelligence and network design.
Okay, set the scene for this experiment, because this is where the line between biology and civil engineering completely blurs.
The researchers wanted to test the spatial optimization capabilities of the slime mold, so they took a physical map of the greater Tokyo area. Now, context is key here. The Tokyo railway system is widely considered to be one of the most complex, robust, and highly optimized mass transit networks in human history.
It's a marvel of engineering.
It took generations of highly educated urban planners, civil engineers, and billions of dollars to design a system that efficiently balances the needs of millions of commuters while navigating the geographic constraints of mountains and coastlines.
So the scientists take this map of Tokyo, and they place little oat flakes. The Spanish source calls them copos de avena, which is basically just oatmeal. A very simple, highly desirable food source for the mold on all the specific locations on the map that represented the major cities, suburban hubs, and key train stations around the Tokyo Bay Area.
They essentially built a topographical model where the food represented population centers. Then they placed the slime mold right in the center of the map, exactly where the main central Tokyo train station is located.
And then what?
And then they stepped back, set up a time-lapse camera, and just watched what the organism would do.
The mold behaves exactly how you would expect a hungry organism to behave at first. It wants to find the food. It moves through a process called protoplasmic streaming, essentially pulsing its internal fluids to push its membrane forward.
It expands outward in a sprawling, chaotic, solid yellow circle, reaching out blindly in all directions.
It eventually encounters all the individual oat flakes. But the magic happens after it finds the food. It doesn't just sit there as a giant, messy puddle of slime. Over the next few hours, the mold actively begins to redesign its own body.
It engages in a ruthless process of optimization. The mold starts to thicken the primary tubular connections between the oat flakes. Simultaneously, it begins to retract and absorb the dead-end paths that didn't lead to food, reclaiming that cellular material to reinforce the successful routes.
And the final result. When the researchers overlaid the biological web that the slime mold had constructed to connect the oat flakes with the actual real-world map of the Tokyo railway system, the two networks were almost perfectly identical.
Let the weight of that sink in. The biological network created by a pile of yellow goo mirrored the structural layout designed by thousands of human engineers over decades.
A single-celled organism completely recreated the Tokyo transit network in roughly 26 hours for the cost of a handful of oatmeal.
This raises an important question about how we view problem solving. As the source material dissects, this wasn't a biological coincidence. The mold wasn't randomly guessing.
No.
It was executing an act of mathematically verifiable, optimized design. It found the absolute most efficient way to connect multiple nodes balancing the shortest possible distance with the necessary redundancy to ensure the network wouldn't fail if one path was severed.
It solved a complex spatial geometry problem, and it did it without a single neuron. It has no brain. It has no central nervous system. It is incredibly humbling. We walk around with such a massive egos, incredibly proud of our master's degrees, our artificial intelligence models, and our supercomputers.
Yeah.
We think we are the pinnacle of intelligent design.
We really do.
And a translucent amoeba from the forest floor beats us at civil engineering without even having the capacity to think. But wait, we have to go deeper, because mapping a subway system isn't even the most astonishing thing this organism can do.
It gets weirder.
It doesn't just design, it learns. And it has the capacity for memory.
Yes, the research papers detail a secondary set of experiments involving habituation, specifically using salt. Physarum polycephalum has a natural aversion to salt. It disrupts their cellular chemistry. It is toxic to them.
So the researchers designed a biological obstacle course. They placed a barrier of salt directly between the slime mold and its food source.
The first time the mold encounters the salt bridge, you can physically observe its aversion. It stops, it hesitates, it doesn't want to cross the toxic environment.
But eventually, the biological imperative to eat overrides the aversion, and it slowly, cautiously creeps a tiny tendril across the salt to secure the food. It minimizes its contact with the salt as much as possible.
But here's where the concept of learning emerges. The researchers don't just do it once. They repeatedly subject the same slime mold to the same salt barrier.
Over and over.
And by the third, fourth, and fifth trial, the organism's behavior fundamentally changes. It no longer hesitates. It doesn't pause at the edge of the salt. It moves directly and rapidly across the barrier to get the food.
It realized that the salt, while annoying and uncomfortable, wasn't actually present in a high enough concentration to be a lethal threat. It remembered its previous encounters. It adapted its future behavior based on its past experience.
Which is astounding because learning and memory are cognitive traits we have historically exclusively associated with higher-order animals, creatures with complex brains, or, at the very least, a rudimentary nervous system with synapses that can fire and store data.
The fact that a single, undivided cell can habituate to an external stimulus and override its instinctual programming is a biological marvel.
But the rabbit hole goes even deeper. Because if you don't have a brain and you don't have neurons, where's that memory actually stored? How do you retain information?
To answer this, the scientists performed what I think is the most mind-bending experiment of all. They took a slime mold that had been through the salt trials, we'll call it the experienced mold, the one that learned to ignore the salt.
Okay, we have the experienced one.
Then they took a brand new, genetically identical novice mold that had been raised in a pristine environment and had never encountered salt before.
And because they are technically giant, single cells enclosed by a membrane, you can physically manipulate them. The researchers placed the experienced mold and the novice mold next to each other and pushed them together until their cell walls touched and eventually fused. They merged into one larger single organism.
So the first time I read this, my mind went straight to our modern technology. I thought, oh, this is like airdropping a photo from my iPhone to yours.
Right, that's the modern equivalent.
You just transmit the data wirelessly,
Yeah.
and suddenly both phones have the picture. But the more you dig into the biology, the more you realize that digital analogy completely falls short.
Right, because a digital file is abstract data stored on a hard drive. With the slime mold, the memory isn't software. It is a physical, structural reality.
Oh.
Think of it more like taking a glass of clear water and adding a concentrated drop of blue dye. When the older, experienced mold fuses with the novice mold, its chemical experience physically bleeds into the new organism. The molecules, the internal fluid dynamics, the actual physical state of the experienced cell flows into the new one, permanently changing the makeup of the entire combined entity.
Exactly. And the result of that physical merging is immediate. The moment the fusion was complete, the scientists put this newly combined mold in front of a salt barrier, and without any hesitation, the entire organism crossed it.
The novice half didn't need to learn.
No. The memory was transferred physically. The memory is literally a specific concentration of molecules flowing through the organism's tubes.
The philosophical implications of that are profound. It forces us to completely deconstruct and redefine our understanding of the word intelligence. If we connect this to the bigger picture of human history, we have always been incredibly arrogant about what constitutes intelligence.
So arrogant.
We associate it exclusively with the physical organ of the brain. We operate under the assumption that consciousness, self-awareness, and a central processor are absolute prerequisites for complex problem solving. We look at a brainless organism like a mold or a fungus, and we categorically assume it is dumb.
Right. We treat intelligence like an object, a thing that sits inside our skulls. You either have a brain and you are smart, or you don't, and you are just a reactionary biological machine.
But the slime mold shatters that paradigm. It proves that intelligence doesn't need to be a centralized object. Intelligence can simply be an emergent property of a very simple system following very simple rules.
Let's unpack that concept of an emergent property, because it is crucial here for our B2 listeners. An emergent property means that when you combine a bunch of very simple basic things, they interact in a way that creates a complex behavior that you could never have predicted just by looking at the individual parts.
Like water.
The classic example is water. A single molecule of H2O is not wet. Wetness doesn't exist at the molecular level. But when you put billions of water molecules together, the property of wetness emerges. It creates an ocean.
That is exactly how the slime mold biological algorithm functions. It is a perfectly decentralized network. There is no boss cell located in the center telling the outer tendrils where to stretch. There is no central planning committee debating the most efficient route to the oat flakes.
No bureaucratic red tape.
None. The rules governing the slime mold are entirely localized and incredibly simple. When a tendril finds food, the chemical signals and fluids flowing through that specific microscopic tube increase. That increased flow physically stretches the tube, making it wider and stronger. Conversely, when a tendril hits a dead end, the fluid flow stops. The tube weakens, dries up, and the cellular material is reabsorbed to save energy.
It is the purest form of optimization for survival. It doesn't think in any way that a human being understands thinking. It doesn't conceptualize the Tokyo Transit map. It just acts.
It reacts to localized chemical feedback loops.
It is a living, biological computer processing inputs and outputs through fluid dynamics. The intelligence isn't an object. It is a process. It is the physical, ongoing action of adapting perfectly to the immediate environment.
And that stark realization, the elegance of process over planning, brings the sprawling narrative of this entire deep dive full circle.
Let's zoom out and look at the massive, contrasting picture we have painted over the last hour. Think about the dichotomy we have explored today.
It's quite the spectrum.
On one side of the spectrum, you have human beings. We possess the most complex, energy-dense brains on the planet. We have self-awareness, we have language, we have the ability to project into the future. And what do we do with that immense cognitive power?
We utilize it to create incredibly messy, chaotic, deeply fragile systems of control. We build massive global supply chains that are so precariously balanced that a localized political crisis in Iran can instantly drain 150 million euros a day from the pockets of European citizens.
We elect politicians who wipe out decades of environmental regulations with a single signature, throwing the entire multi-billion-dollar global auto industry into a state of panic and reactionary paralysis.
And when our top-down, overly complicated, ego-driven systems inevitably begin to fail under their own weight, what is our solution? We don't simplify. We double down.
We attempt to build even more massively complex, incredibly expensive, high-risk, top-down technology. We literally try to engineer the mechanics of the sky.
The space mirrors.
We draw plans to launch constellations of giant space mirrors to force the sun to shine at midnight, risking catastrophic light pollution and the weaponization of orbital space, all just to keep our fragile, inefficient terrestrial energy grids running for a few more hours.
We constantly fight our environment. Our entire civilization is built on the premise of dominating nature, bending it to our will through sheer force of engineering and capital.
Meanwhile, sitting quietly on the forest floor, you have this completely brainless, perfectly optimized yellow slime mold. It doesn't fight its environment. It doesn't build mirrors to change the lighting.
It simply maps its environment perfectly. It optimizes its entire existence by fluidly adapting and following the path of least resistance.
It solves a spatial problem that took human engineers decades to conquer. And it does it in an afternoon, fueled by nothing more than a few flakes of oatmeal.
It's just wild.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a truly provocative thought to mull over as we end the week. We have always operated under the unquestioned assumption that human consciousness, our massive brains, and our ability to impose top-down control are our greatest evolutionary assets.
What are they?
When you look at the utter chaos of the auto industry, the fragility of the energy markets, and the sheer desperation of launching mirrors into space, you really have to pause and wonder, are our brains, and more importantly, our massive human egos, actually the very things getting in the way of solving our biggest global problems?
It is a humbling perspective. Perhaps true efficiency and sustainability aren't about imposing rigid control from the top down. Maybe the solution to the energy crisis and the fracturing of our modern industrial world doesn't require us to look up at tech billionaires playing God in low Earth orbit.
Maybe, just maybe, we need to be looking down at the damp floor of the forest.
We might need to learn how to operate a little more like the slime mold, decentralized, fluidly adaptable, deeply connected to localized feedback loops, and working in harmony with the environment instead of endlessly trying to out-engineer it.
That is a profound place to leave it. Listeners, we have thrown a massive amount of information and philosophy at you today. From the crumbling economics of diesel engines to the privatization of the night sky, all the way to the chemical memory of forest amoebas.
We covered a lot of ground.
We genuinely want to hear your perspectives on all of this. Head down to the comments right now. Tell us, how would you react to a space mirror lighting up your neighborhood at 2 a.m.? And does the behavior of the slime mold change how you define what it means to be smart? Let us know.
It is always a privilege to dissect these complex global systems with you all. Keep analyzing the news you consume, keep looking for those hidden connections, and most importantly, keep questioning the systems of power that govern our world.
Absolutely. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive. Keep practicing your English comprehension with us by wrestling with these massive ideas, and have an incredible, thought-provoking weekend.
We will be right back here next time on the Daily English Buzz. Goodbye.